Florida's potential wine comeback story is interesting, considering I think they skipped the whole part where they had a wine industry. Vinarchy is looking at 60 of its wine labels saying, hey, it's not me, it's you. France is doubling down on pulling up some wines, and cycling.com, well, James sent a couple of his tasters to Texas wine country, and they said, hey, you know what? It's growing up, and we would have to agree. All that and more on this week's episode of This Week Uncorked. Hello and welcome to episode 77 of This Week Uncorked for Monday, January 5th, 2026. The year is upon us. Woohoo. We are here. I'm Brett Martin from Cork and Journey. We're your number one source for corkage fees, winery reviews, wine reviews, restaurant reviews, regional wine guides, and so much more. Not really your number one source. Well, we are probably your number one source for corkage fees. We do kind of have that market cornered. The rest, a lot of great guides out there. But you know what? Our reviews are pretty decent. You can check them out as well. And while I'm on this little rant, every week I say, welcome to this week's episode of This Week Uncorked. And I always want to say, no, don't say that. Say, welcome to this episode of This Week Uncorked. You know, maybe I'll get that down. I got a lot on my mind. And with that, let's get to this week's wine news. All right, in all seriousness, there's a press release over in Wine Business. The article is the breakthrough with the first successful harvest of a disease-resistant grapes in Florida. It reports that researchers in Florida have successfully grown 5 grape varieties that are resistant to Pierce's disease, which is a bacterial infection, which basically any Vitis vinifera grape, any real wine grape that we kind of think of, wow, these are great grapes, you just can't grow them down there. You know, they've got the muscadine grape, which is interesting. It doesn't have so much sugar. It kind of ferments to like its maximum alcohol is going to be like 4 or 5%. Then it's kind of done fermenting. So you got to add sugar. There's all kinds of craziness that goes on with that grape. And it's fine. It's native to the United States. So it's what grows there. But they're like, man, you know, we'd like to grow real grapes, but I don't know where you would in Florida. I mean, it's not like they've got, you know, hills, a mound. I don't know what they have. But anyway, I lived there and I'm just still trying to figure out one part of Florida. Maybe, you know, because they take the trash and they just pile it up and they make a little mountain out of it. Maybe you just grow your vines on the side of the trash. Anyway, so from the article, while Florida has a thriving muscadine grape industry, yes, they do, the global market for muscadine wine is small, as it should be. And by the way, I'm just adding these things in here, compared to wine made from Vitis vinifera, the species of grapes behind world-famous wines such as Cabernet Sauvignon, Sauvignon Blanc, and Merlot. What an interesting 3 grapes they chose there. Florida is already the nation's second highest wine-consuming state, only behind California, with an industry valued at $15 billion in 2022. Yet most of the wines served are produced elsewhere, primarily in California, Oregon, and Washington, because they have the climates to grow grapes. Anyway, but they hope now with this new great research that they can grow some other grapes there. I don't know. Good luck. We'll see what happens there. At least they're trying, you know, keep hope alive. I just wonder with the temperatures, it seems like the vines would never go dormant. You know, I need someone to write me, let me know. I don't see how this is going to work. I know I read something about somebody planted some vines in the tropics and basically they bore fruit like twice a year. They just never stopped because, you know, there's no time for them to rest and it's got to shorten their lifespan, I would think. But anyway. All right, and moving on over at the drinks business, Ron Elmer is reporting on Australia's second largest wine company, Vinarchy. They are doing a sweeping overhaul of all their wine brands and are getting rid of 60 different labels, which is only 40% of its portfolio. That's a lot of wine labels. I guess, you know, you're just targeting. We get to these wines where it's like, oh, we're going after this demographic, and we're going to give this one a cute name. This one's called 19 Crimes, and this one's called this, and this one's this. And eventually it's just a gimmicky kind of thing, you know, like seltzer, hard seltzers. It all starts to run its course after a little bit of time, it would seem like. Anyway, from the article, in addition, Vinarchy is planning a serious drive to tap into a new generation of drinkers by shifting to smaller bottles to appeal to consumers who are more selective and drinking less. This program will include the launch of mini bottles, a chill-infused rosé, I think that's a chili-infused rosé, and a mid-strength Sauvignon Blanc, further breaking away from the characterization of Australian wines as high in alcohol and having any quality whatsoever. Anyway, good luck there, Vinarchy. It's crazy. Anyway, moving on with the news. Kind of on a sad news. Last year, we talked about how France, they had the government paid, I think it was 120 million euros to help farmers basically rip out vines because they were just they're going to waste. Well, Reuters is reporting that the French Agriculture Ministry is basically given another 130 million euros, about $150 million US, to continue the uprooting of the vines. From the article, the French Agriculture Ministry said on Monday it would give the wine industry additional support of 130 million euros for the further uprooting of vines to guard against excessive output, adding it would also ask the European Union to chip in. The sector is suffering from a deteriorating situation marked by the effects of climate change, which have repeatedly affected harvests for several years, the continued decline in wine consumption, particularly red wines, and major geopolitical tensions, the ministry said in a statement. That's referring to tariffs and other things that are affecting the French wine industry. It's real. It's real. It's unfortunate. I can't tell you, when we were over there this last summer, the number of small producers who don't have distribution anymore. And, maybe they're selling in some local restaurants or whatever, but they're just sitting on virtually the entire production of 2021, 2022, 2023. They got to get it out. It's not like they're holding it back for release. They just don't have any buyers, and they don't have any distributors who are willing to take it. So, problematic. Anyway, moving on with the news. I'm going to wrap it up. JamesSuckling.com put out his 2025 Texas tasting report. Evidently, they had done one other report. Two gentlemen from Suckling.com basically went down there and tasted through all the wines, similar to what we did a few years ago. What I loved about this is that they pretty much came up with the same two wineries that we think are just fantastic. Calais, which you can't go wrong. This is the Merlot. We did that blind tasting interview with Rex Pickett where we blind tasted Merlots. And, I think depending on where you were, depending on who was, I think Tina and I both picked the Mathiasen Merlot as number one. And then number two was the Gabby, which was a left bank. And then the Bordeaux. And then the number three, I think, on all of our cards was the Calais, which is pretty good out of the six wines we tasted. That put them above Stag's Leap, put them above Frog's Leap, put them above a couple other wineries that we had in there. So good job all the way around. And then Ron Yates. Ron Yates is another one. He's doing some great stuff up there as well. Let's not forget Siboney and some others. But it's a nice, really report, kind of details go through. This is extensive too, and it's in front of the firewall, so you don't have to subscribe to Suckling.com to read it. You do if you want to look at the general scores, but by reading the article, you get a pretty good idea of where to go and what you should do. And we have our Texas wine guide on Cork and Journey as well. So if you're heading over to Fredericksburg, that whole area in there, and you want to do some tasting, check that out as well. But from the report, we arrived to conduct our second major tasting of Texas wines in less than a year, finding a broader range of high-scoring wines than before and the same fascinating diversity in grape varieties and growing regions. What stood out this time was our exposure to numerous high-quality wine producers that were new to us, as well as the huge span of wine styles and types. Our highest-scoring wines included the Roussanne. Actually, this is the Rousseau. That's the Roussanne. White rum grape from variety from the Texas High Plains appellation, Chardonnay and Tempranillo from the Texas Hill Country, and a large number of red blends across the broad Texas designation on the labels, which means they're either being grown down there in the Hill Country or up in the Lodi area, which is where a ton of grapes are up there. And then Calais's got some interesting, he's going to some other little areas in Texas and starting to grow some stuff there. So they do have the regions for it. Texas is not all flat. There are places where you actually can grow grapes, and starting to see some stuff come out of there. I'd like to see them go a little more organic. The whole Lodi area is a little rough, but we'll see. All right. And with that, let's get to our wine and winery of the week. Okay, we're going to go back-to-back weeks. We're going to the Rogue Valley up in Ashland, Oregon area. This time it's the Weisinger Family Winery. Again, I think last week we talked about Baccofurore. This week, Weisinger, beautiful property, scenic views, indoor seating, outdoor seating. Reservations are not required. Tastings are a whopping $12. Yes, Dorothy, you're not in Napa anymore. They do some interesting stuff. I think we bought we had a bottle. We just drank it the other day. I think it was a Tempranillo of theirs that we had. It was the last one we had of the group that we bought up there. But if you're in that area, Irvine Roberts, Baccofurore, Weisinger, a couple others, they're all very good, and they make for lovely afternoons, and they're not going to break the bank at all to check them out. And for our wine of the week, we've been talking about the 2022 Rutherford Hill Merlot. This is 2 weeks in a row. I'm going with a wine. This is a $38 list. You can find it for about $25 pretty much anywhere. Served by the glass in a lot of restaurants as well. I rated it 90 points. I'm trying to kind of come up with some of these wines that are you're at a restaurant, you're like, what can I order by the glass? I'm starting to see this one a lot. So, last week we talked about the Klein family Old Vine Zinfandel. You can see that on a lot of wine lists, especially by the glass now. And these are real wines, quality wines, and they're decent. And so give it a try. So, and especially, reasonably priced across the board. And with that, let's move on to our restaurant and Corkage of the week. All right, we're going to the Amalfi Coast to Baccofurore. This place, man, it is perched on the hillside. It is directly across the street from Marisa Cuomo, a winery, and we reviewed that several months ago. We talked about it on the show as well. You actually can go to the winery and then walk across the street. They will actually do a wine pairing dinner for you with Marisa Cuomo wines. So that is worth it. I would recommend if you're going to go eat at Baccofurore, and if you are in the Amalfi region, I would make a pilgrimage to this place. I would do both. I would do Marisa Cuomo, and I would definitely do here. You can see from that aerial that Freddie was showing a minute ago. I mean, man, it's spectacular. It really spectacular. You cannot go wrong with this place. Anyway, great food, great wines, and man, the views hard to beat. Really hard to beat. All right, everybody, that is going to wrap up another edition of This Week Uncorked. As always, we would love it if you would subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite social media apps. Follow us on your favorite podcast apps, all those kind of things. Until next week, everybody, goodbye. But hey, check out that interview we did down below with Ian Cobble with his new, we're talking about everything in Ian Cobble's life, Master Somm. And we also talk about the Cobblist, his new wine club. Check it out, cobblist.com. Use the code CORK10 to get 10% off your first order, we think. I don't know if that's working, but it will be by the time you see this. All right. Take care, everybody. Cheers.